Kavante Turpin needs to get more touches in the Dallas Cowboys offense. We'll tell you how that might happen going forward on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And I believe it's at McCool on Blue Sky, correct?
Yeah, McCool.bsky, whatever the social media is, but it's McCool. Just search that, you'll find me.
On today's show, we are going to be discussing or answering your Twitter questions, including Luke Schoonmaker's development, what's going on at right guard for the Dallas Cowboys. But I want to start with this question from Jack on KaVontae Turpin. He wants to know, how can the Cowboys get Turpin more involved in this offense, and what is his upside as a receiver? I do think this is interesting because we've seen over the last couple of weeks, Landon, him become more involved. He's created some big plays. It was against Houston. He had the long touchdown. Against the Giants, he had a bunch of big plays early in that game. And then, of course, against Washington, the kick return for a touchdown. First, let's start with this. How did they get him more involved in the offense this year?
Look, I was having an interesting conversation with somebody actually who DM'd me about this and was like just kind of pulling their hair out saying, it seems like he's a real playmaker. Why don't they do more to involve him in the offense? And I told him in training camp, it sure seemed like they were going to do more with him in the offense. And it felt like what happened is that they were kind of all gung-ho about having him be part of a fourth receiver, a rotational third receiver, a guy that you could come in and run special plays to, and I think the actual question that the listener had reached out to was, why don't they play more of Turp in the backfield? And which was another thing that we saw them do in training camp that we haven't seen them do as much lately, right? Like, it felt like what happened is that they got excited about Turp in doing some stuff in the offense during the training camp. They involved him in several different plays and some packages and stuff, as well as also bringing him in and rotating him in as part of the wide receiver rotation. And then it felt like they got into the early part of the regular season. I think there were some drops that Turpin had at a certain point, and I think they kind of basically went away from it because of it. They decided that because they couldn't rely on him to be a contested catch guy, that it was tougher to kind of get the ball to him. And then I think at that point, the larger problems that we're seeing with the offense and disorganization kind of, caused a whole bunch of issues. So now that they finally started to come back to it a little bit more, and they really don't have a lot of better options, to be honest, I do think that it's something that they should start unfurling a little bit more, because again, they installed it all in training camp. It's all in the playbook. So let's see them kind of use it a little bit more. I'd like to see him kind of get up. It's crazy to me that slant touchdown was the first slant that Turpin caught all season. Like, that just seems like a real easy way to get a fast guy the ball on the move and have him knife through a defense.
It's not like we haven't seen him at all on offense this year. He has 4 games this year of at least 50 receiving yards, which again is pretty impressive considering that he's never been more than the 4th receiver on this roster, right? Like, he's made an impact. I think listeners and Cowboy fans just want to know, like, how do they make him more of a consistent part of the offense? And honestly, I think a lot of it is just figuring out the best way to use him. The 49er game, they were throwing him go balls down the sideline. And I just don't think he's that type of receiver. Like, I don't think he's the type of receiver that you want trying to beat press coverage and then tracking a ball over his shoulder and making a contested catch. Like, that's just not him. What you would rather have him do is catch the ball while he's on the move, right? And then allow him to use his punt return ability and kick return ability to make plays after the catch. It's just, how do you do that more than just slants and screens? And I think that's where maybe the Cowboys are struggling a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why I think the questioners, the question I got about him being in the backfield makes a lot of sense. That's a good spot for him. Like obviously you don't want him in pass protection, but like if you could release him out as an outlet, and kind of stretch the defense vertically and create some space underneath, that's a really great way to get him the ball. Have him run a Texas route out from the backfield. Yeah, I think that there's lots of ways to get him the ball on the move, and I agree. I think that they made a mistake earlier in the year when they didn't have Brandon Cooks. They wanted to use Turpin as Brandon Cooks against the 49ers, but that's just not a good fit. They don't.
It's not him. No.
Skill sets. They're both fast, but they're both receivers. But that doesn't mean that Turpin is has Cook's timing or his ability to use his body to box out or to go up and high point the ball. I mean, Cooks is still a significantly larger person.
Oh yeah.
We need to remember, right? Cooks is a diminutive receiver, and he's still significantly larger than Turpin is. So I do think that at a certain point, you have to account for how small Turpin is, and that is going to have an effect on how you deploy him. But at the same time, yeah, I do feel like the Cowboys could do a lot more to get him into opportunities where he has the ball in his hands and he's running through a defense as opposed to having to try to separate from a defender and win and it's subtle, use subtle wide receiver moves to create separation at the top of the route or down that's just not necessarily his game right now.
Yeah. The size difference between Brandon Cooks and Kavante Turpin is 37 pounds.
That's crazy.
There's a bigger size difference between Turpin and Cooks compared to Cooks and CeeDee Lamb, just to put that in comparison. So yes, they're very, very different players. Long term here, and this is where I'm struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
What does this wide receiver room look like in 2025, Landon? Because obviously we have CeeDee Lamb, and that makes things so much easier when you have a bona fide number one receiver. Sure. But Brandon Cooks is a free agent. Jalen Tolbert will be going into the final year of his contract. You have Turpin. You just traded for Jonathan Mingo, a 4th-round pick for Mingo, and it still feels like this team needs a dynamic number 2 receiver. So how does Turpin fit into maybe the future plans of the offense?
I actually don't think that so much is as an issue because I think for me, Turpin is one of these guys, and I think we labeled it like this in training camp, is that he's not a guy that I'm counting towards the wide receiver room, right? He's not a guy that I'm relying on. Oh, wide receiver 3 got hurt. Turpin's taking all those snaps. I think he is more of still more of a gadget player. He's a special teams guy. He certainly is going to be a guy that you want to have as a part of your offense. You're going to try to scheme opportunities for, but he's not a guy that I'm including in my, thoughts on the wide receiver depth chart. So this is all a way of saying he's on the team. If he's, signed and the contract's all correct, then I'm not okay, well, that's one wide receiver down. He's just a separate part of this. You still need to go get a full wide receiver core outside of Turpin in order to feel comfortable about what you're doing.
But should he be a focal point of your offense? And not somebody that you're giving 10 targets to, but somebody that's consistently getting 5 or so opportunities a game. Is he that type of player where you feel we need to game plan touches and looks for him every single week?
I think if you look at think about what a really good Dak Prescott game looks like, right? Usually the defining feature, I think, for a really good Dak Prescott game, he's targeted 11 receivers, right? And they've all gotten opportunities. They've all ate. I just think that there is plenty of benefits to throwing 3 or 4 targets every single game Turpin's way, whether that's pass receptions, handoffs, whatever you want to do, simply because it's something that the defense has to game plan for.
Sure.
It's, an added level of dynamic, playmaker to the offense, a guy that if he gets the ball in his hands, even if it's on the screen, he can take it all the way to the house. I just think that, I do think that having a guy like that who can break a game wide open anytime he touches the ball, it has benefits even when he doesn't get the ball, and even when the play doesn't necessarily work out exactly the way you want. It's just another thing that the defense has to think about, and the other thing that you can build constraints off of, and another thing that you can, roll him out there and use him as a decoy as you throw the ball to somebody else. So I just think it adds an element to your offense without taking it away, and it's not really costing you a roster spot because you need that guy as a kick returner, punt returner anyway. So I do think he is an added benefit. I don't think it's an enormous benefit, but I think even just a niche benefit like that, a guy that can do a couple things really well, at least makes the defense think about it. That has a benefit to this offense, and it doesn't cost you a ton.
All right, let's talk about another player on offense that has improved over the last couple of weeks, and that's Luke Schoonmaker. What do we think of the second-year tight ends development? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. It's also the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are answering your mailbag questions, and we got one from Gordon who wants to know, what should we think of Luke Schoonmaker's development now that he's put together 3 pretty decent games?
I was thinking about this last night. It's funny. Well, not funny. It's weird that the Cowboys, last year drafted 2 players at positions that are notoriously long, slow developing positions, right? And here we are, week 13, right, of their second season. And what are we seeing? We're starting to finally see some life from both our first and second round pick last year. I think obviously we've been kind of harping on Mozzie a little bit more simply because of him being the first round pick. And it feels like he has started to kind of thaw the ice a little bit sooner than maybe Schoonmaker did. But I do think that I'm not going to suggest that Ferguson is about to get Wally pipped, but I do think that the Ferguson injury really, really, really helped Schoonmaker. It just gave him opportunity to start feeling better about his play and about his confidence and that he belongs here. I also think that having Brevin Spanford out there pushing him from underneath also is helping him, right? Because I think you're seeing Brevin Spanford come out there and be probably the best blocking tight end on the field at this point. Certainly in the conversation. And so Schoonmaker came out and he needed to be pushed on both sides of his game. What does he do? He takes advantage of this, chemistry that he has with Cooper Rush. And he's become a big target for this offense these last few weeks. Now, it's not exactly dynamic. He's not exactly going for big gains. Obviously, his big touchdown was a big gain. But outside of that, it's more of the 6-7 yard receptions, picking up some solid yards, not necessarily breaking tackles and turning them into 15-yard gains like you see with Ferguson. But this is what was drafted to do, right? Is to be this kind of alternate outlet, a blocking tight end. And so I think in that element, in that, realm, you've seen him take several steps forward. It's been really important to kind of see him take advantage of this opportunity. And then I think when Ferguson comes back, you're gonna see a more confident player when he gets his opportunities, even though they will be obviously a lot more limited once Ferguson comes back. You'll just see a guy who is just more confident between opportunities and hopefully will kind of be a better finisher, because I think that has been the issue at times in the past is just him finishing on plays.
Yeah, I was getting nervous about Schoon midway through the season because you look at like the snap counts, Landon. He played 2 snaps against the 49ers, 1 snap against the Falcons, and then 11 snaps against the Eagles. Brevin Spanford outsnapped him in all 3 games. Like it felt pretty much like he was going to he had declined to the 3rd tight end on the roster. Ferguson was your receiving tight end. Brevin Spanford was your designated blocking tight end. And then Schoon was just kind of the 3rd guy on this roster. But since the Ferguson injury, 45 snaps, 43 snaps, 50 snaps. And I think he's performed really well as a receiver. Again, you're right. Like he's not a yak guy, but he's so doggone big that you can kind of just throw him the ball and he's going to catch it. I think I've been encouraged by his receiving improvement. He still needs to work on as being a blocker. There's way too many times where he's falling off blocks. He's way too many times he's getting penalties. But I do like what we've seen from him as a receiver. And I know London Wells challenged him to be more consistent. And I do think we're starting to see that a little bit over the last couple games.
Yeah, I do think that this is going to be a really enormous offseason for both him and Mozzie, obviously. I think for Mozzie, it's going to be the first opportunity to kind of have it all lined up. He'll be healthy. He'll get an opportunity to actually get in there and get some strength on him. And for Schoonmaker, it's kind of like, okay, now he's sort of kind of got his feet underneath him. He gets a full training camp of understanding his role, having the confidence to kind of attack the offseason. And then I'm excited to see what both of these guys come with on the other side of the 2025 or the start of the 2025 season, because I do think that, it has been a long time coming, but I think similar to both these guys, you've seen them start to really figure it out these last few weeks, in a season in which, it feels like things are falling apart. There's been lots of opportunity for younger guys to kind of get in there and gain some opportunity, gain some clarity on how their games look in the NFL. And I think that you're starting to see that, translate into confidence for guys like Schoonmaker.
One of the things I'm going to be paying attention to over the final month of the season is I think we expect Ferguson back this week against the Bengals. Mm-hmm. What does this snap breakdown look like at tight end? I'm assuming Ferguson's going to go right back to his every down role, but do we see Schoonmaker go back down to a dozen snaps a game and Brevin Spanford play the 20-25 as a designated blocking tight end? Like basically they keep the same roles, but it's Schoonmaker's role who goes down because Ferguson comes back, or has Schoonmaker shown enough over the last couple of games to go right back into that tight end 2 role? We'll see. I think Brevin Spanford, we should mention him a little bit more. I think he's played well as a blocker. He doesn't give you much as a receiver. He is very much like catch it, fall down. But he's like 6'7", so he's going to get you a first down almost anytime he catches the ball. But Schoonmaker's a lot more dynamic that way, and he actually has the size and athleticism to make plays up the seam.
Yeah, I mean, it's Schoonmaker who's probably the best athlete of them all, to be honest. Yes. But that doesn't necessarily translate into great yak production the way that Ferguson does, because Ferguson's very loose. He's flexible. He changes direction well. So I think those are all reasons that he's a much more dynamic receiver, right? I do think that you have an interesting kind of trio now, right? Where you've got Fergie as the kind of receiving tight end, BSF as truly just a tackle in a tight end's body, right?
Small tackle.
Yeah, and then Schooney somewhere kind of in between the two. So I think that it's going to probably be game plan specific, right? Depending on how they want to attack a defense, how often they're getting rotated and how they're being deployed. So I think I think if anything, one thing I would like to see them doing more of, simply because I think it's a good fit, is I would like to see Schooney get used more and become more of a red zone weapon, right? Because he's a big guy who can move, he's athletic, and the Cowboys have a need there. And I think throwing Schooney a high pass, in the back of the end zone, to me feels a lot more palatable than trying to throw a fade route to Cooks or whatever. What else? Some of the other stuff we've seen at different points in the red zone. So I think that would be a good fit for both the offense and for Schoonmaker.
Last thing before we move on, one of the not theories, because that's the wrong word. I've noticed the run game has been better the last 2 weeks, and part of me wonders, is it just because we're seeing Spanford and Schoonmaker play more together, and those guys are just better blockers than Jake Ferguson, and you just have a little bit more beef on the edges? Like, is that possible as well, or is it just more of a coincidence here?
I think it's possible. It does feel like you've gotten better perimeter blocking these last few weeks. I don't want to say that's because Ferguson's gone, because I think that Ferguson is a pretty decent blocker, but yeah, I think that having some bigger, stronger folks in there that can actually physically move guys out of the hole,
Yeah.
especially BSF, I think helps for sure. I also think that, when you're younger and you've got fresher legs and you're playing in the middle of the later part of the season, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of get going and get a little bit angled. And I think that applies across the line as well to guys like, Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass. That just having fresher legs out there is going to be a benefit at the position.
Let's talk about those guys, because I think we might have a brewing Zack Martin problem over the next month of the season. We will dive into that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And Week 14 is a fantastic time to get in on the NFL action. We've got Lions-Packers on Thursday. What an awesome primetime game to kick off the week. And then, of course, on Monday Night Football, it's your Dallas Cowboys hosting the Cincinnati Bengals. Go to FanDuel.com and never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. Available wherever you get your podcast. All right, Lena, let's talk about the right guard situation, because it feels like the last couple of weeks they've had their best success running the ball. It just so happens to be that Zack Martin hasn't played in either of those games. We don't expect Zack Martin to play this week against the Bengals, but let's say a similar result happens, right? The Cowboys are good on offense. They should be. They're playing this Bengals defense, which I have a hard time even calling them a defense. But if they're able to run the ball well again this week, and we've got 4 games left, do you put in a less than 100% Zack Martin if you're still trying to develop some of these young offensive linemen?
I think you have to. I mean, I don't disagree with the premise, right? The idea is that Zack Martin he's just not the same Zack Martin, right? And a lot of that is injury, a lot of that is age, a lot of it is both, right? He's especially dealt with just a number of upper and lower body injuries this year. We've just seen him playing in a way that we've never seen him play before, right? And I'll go back a little bit. Let's say this, right? Like, Zack Martin never really had injury problems, right?
No.
Like, I mean, throughout his career. Like, so now that we're starting to see them kind of pile up and add on to him, it's really starting to take a toll on him, right? You're seeing, like I said, on tape when he's playing, you're seeing things happen to him that you would never see. I've watched literally every single snap of Zack Martin's entire career. I've watched a good probably all of his college snaps as well, honestly. Yeah. And I just think that, what we've seen from him, the way he's been beat at certain points, by guys that are just not of his ilk, like, just not of his quality, middle tier NFL defensive lineman beating Zack Martin. Like, that's just not who he is. And it hasn't been. So clearly we're not getting the same guy. And I can't imagine that even when he comes back from this, temporary time off from the injury, that he's like gonna suddenly be back to earlier in the year, even 2 year ago Zack Martin. So this is all a very long-winded way of saying that when Zack got hurt, they put Brock Hoffman in. I think you and I were both surprised that it was Hoffman, not TJ Bass, that went in. But obviously, Hoffman has played, I would say, pretty well. I would say very well, honestly, just compared to where we thought he would be and, just general expectations. Clearly, the results are what we just mentioned, that they've been positive, the best running attack the Cowboys have had these last few weeks. So how do you handle this situation? This is obviously a Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, as far as I'm concerned, a Ring of Honor player, one of the greatest players who's ever played for the Dallas Cowboys, right? I do think that, as much as we want to handle business like football business and football, and it's always merit-based, I'm not going to be the one to tell Zack Martin he's not starting when he comes back from the injured reserve. Like, I just think that the guy has given so much for you to you for so long. Like, he deserves the opportunity to go out and, I don't know, potentially play the last snaps of his career, certainly likely playing the last few snaps of his Dallas career. I understand, like, the winning and losing problem and all that stuff. But to me, and this may be just a personal thing because of how I feel about Zack Martin, I'm sure I know you feel the same way. I couldn't do that to Zack Martin. So yeah. I think you have to let him play.
So number one, I don't think Dallas is going to rush him back because there's no incentive to rush him back.
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
you want him to get healthy first and foremost, but you also have guys that you want to develop, right? So when he comes back, I got to believe he's going to be at full health or close to full health, right? And that'll make the decision easier. And I also got to believe that, like, if Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass see Zack Martin practicing and wanting to play, I don't think either of those guys are going to be like, "Hey, step aside, Zack. It's our turn now."
Right aside, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
too much respect there for that guy.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think this is going to work itself out. I don't think you're going to have a situation where we have a healthy Zack Martin practicing in full for 3 days in a row and then not suiting up on game day. I think it's going to work itself out. I just wouldn't be surprised, Landon, like, if we don't get an answer from him until week 17 when they play when they play Philadelphia. Like, we might wait a couple more weeks before we see Zack Martin again. I don't think he's going to want to go out the way that he went out against, was it the Texans a couple weeks ago? I can't buy that that's going to be his last snaps in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think for him, he's got a really tough decision to make, like, on a legacy level, right? Like, does he want to go back a little bit early because he wants to play every single snap that he has the opportunity to play while he can, or does he want to wait until he's healthier and so he doesn't put out, really bad tape that affects our memory of who Zack Martin is, right?
No.
So yeah, I think that's something that Zach's going to have to figure out for himself, probably. But yeah, I have to imagine that unlike almost any other player on this team, Zack is in full control of whether he's going to be starting or not these last.
Which he should be. He's earned that right. Yeah,
absolutely.
My prediction is that we will see him back on the football field at least for one more game this year. Whether that's, again, week 16, week 17, week 18. I do think we're going to see Zack play one more time. What do you think?
I hope so, man. Look, like I said, one of my favorite all-time Cowboys. I think one of the best Cowboys ever played this game.
Yeah.
I'd like to see him out in the silver and blue one more time, just for my memory's sake, honestly.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out that new Locked On NFL show. Go download our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.